Okay, welcome to the episode 4 of the Scientist Podcast. And today we have Dr. Joseph Lutz, who is the Director of Postdoctoral Affairs in University of Kentucky. So today our topic is we're going to talk about science communication and how science communication can help international students across the US and across the globe. So thank you for joining us and please tell me about yourself, your childhood, and how did you come here?
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be the fourth guest on your podcast, and yeah, happy to tell you a little bit about myself. I am half French, half English. So my dad's French and my mom's English, and I grew up mostly in France. Although I did do a 5 year stint in Brazil when my dad was an expat there. So my first, 5 years of my life were actually spent in Brazil. We then came back to France, and I grew up there. I went through the schooling system there up till the French baccalaureate, which is when a graduating high school equivalent essentially. And then I went to do my undergrad at the University of Bath in England, um, and I did a degree in biochemistry. And one of the really exciting things about the program at the University of Bath at the time was that you did what's called a sandwich year, right? So I was at the university for the first 2 years. And then the third year, I went and worked for 1 year in the lab, right? And it turns out that the lab that I worked in for that third year to get hands-on experience in the lab doing research was at the University of Kentucky. So that's when I met. And the reason that there was a connection between the University of Kentucky and the University of Bath is because Dr. Jim Pauly, who is formerly a professor in the College of Pharmacy here at UK, had a collaboration with a faculty member at the University of Bath. And he heard about this sandwich year, and basically realized that he could invite a few students a year to come and work in labs as undergraduate students, right? And so that's kind of how I built my connection with the University of Kentucky. So I came here, did 1 year of undergraduate research, went back, finished my degree in biochemistry. And then after that, I actually did not go straight into science. First, I worked in France for a year. Um, and so this is like, straight out of undergrad. I did want to be in research and science in some way. And the first job I got was actually in a company that was doing 3D modeling of proteins and superimposition of proteins and ligands to look for new drug targets and things like that. It was a small company that was run out of someone's basement. Like the CEO is this guy who had been a scientist, and he started this company in his basement. And the only reason they hired me is because I spoke English, right? This was in France, and they were like, "Yeah, we need to build up our clientele. We need someone who can speak English." Um, Lo and behold, it wasn't the most interesting job because I basically would spam people and try and get clients for this company. And so I kind of transitioned and went and worked for the National Center for Scientific Research in France, with a family friend who was organizing a conference about science and society. This was actually under the so in Europe, in the European Union, each country gets to be the leader in terms of like science exchange for 1 year at a time, right? So France at the time had like this kind of honor, and so we had some funds to basically organize events, and we organized this large conference about science and society, and I know the theme for this today is science communication, and to me that really kind of sits. That's where it sits, right? It's being able to communicate with all parties involved, right? So when we do science, when we create new knowledge, when we make discoveries, it affects all of us, right? And so it was kind of a first foray into the science and society kind of realm, and it was really, really interesting working with both scientific leaders, but also thought leaders, and how do we integrate our science enterprise within the European Union as a whole, and how does it work, and so on and so forth. During that time, I had applied to graduate school to come back to the University of Kentucky and pursue a PhD. And so it was a short stint. I was in France for a year, and I worked on that project for about 8 months. And then in 2008, I came here and started my PhD in pharmaceutical sciences. And my objective was to work in the same lab where I had worked as an undergrad because I had a good relationship with the PI, and I really enjoyed the work, and I'm happy to kind of go into a little bit of the work too. But despite the fact that I knew who I wanted to work for, I did rotations and went through the PhD process as you do here in the US. And I did end up going in the same lab and doing and continuing some of the work that I'd done as an undergrad. And then graduated in 2014 with a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences. This is not a pharmacy degree. I cannot dispense medication. This was, purely research. I'm a neuropharmacologist. And after that, I went and did a postdoc myself at the University of Illinois Chicago, and kind of transitioned from a drug discovery PhD to a more behavioral psychology postdoc, where I was working with humans and administering drugs and asking behavioral questions. And during that time, I got involved with the Postdoctoral Association, and really saw the impact of community and how it can help a workforce within an institution to really build out networks and opportunities to branch out into different careers. And this was at a time where you get to a postdoc, you're realizing, wow, I've been training my whole life to become a faculty member, but lo and behold, there's not that many opportunities in that realm, right? And that's still true today, and that's something that we work with postdocs here at UK. And so during that time, getting involved with the PDA, I really was interested in how can I support postdocs, right? And an opportunity came up at the University of Illinois Chicago to run the newly created postdoc office in the Office of Research up there. And so I did that for a year before actually coming back to the University of Kentucky when my wife was hired as an assistant professor here. And so when that happened, I reached out to the local PDA, which is the Society of Postdoctoral Scholars, who connected me with the dean of the grad school, and we talked about creating a postdoc office here at UK. And so that was in 2019, and so the stars kind of aligned, and I came here and created the postdoc office at UK. And I've been here ever since, supporting our postdocs in a variety of ways. It's been now 6 years, and so there's been some changes in some of the priorities. We did go through a pandemic and those kinds of things, and so interesting times, and very excited to continue this work with our postdocs.
Yeah, so that was a very nice and thorough and very kind introduction, and you explained everything beautifully. So one of the first thing that we want to understand, and based on our theme of this meeting or this podcast, just to why is it really needed? Like why science communication is needed, and why we need a certain people in university that can help with science communication.
Okay, so I'll answer the first question first.
Yeah.
Science communication is needed for many reasons, but one of the main ones is we don't do science in a vacuum, right? We need to be able to communicate not just with peers, but we need to also to communicate with our funders. We need to be able to communicate with the people who are going to hire us to do science, whether it be in industry or academia. You know, that's to me that's the crux of the issue when it comes to science communication, is that you need to be able to talk to a variety of audiences about the work that you do, to give it value and for it to be understood by everyone that is going to interact with it, right? You can't just work in the lab and come up with a discovery and never tell anyone. There's no point, right? The purpose is to share it with the world and for us to collectively build our knowledge and move forward with discoveries and benefits to health and economies and agriculture and all the things that like lots of people do work on. I have to say one of the benefits of my position is that I get to interact with postdocs who do a variety of work, and so I can see that the impact is just everywhere, right? And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that what we do matters, and being able to communicate that is key. I will say to your second question, I'm not necessarily the person on this campus who is in charge of making sure that our trainees are skilled in science communication. but part of my work does interact with that. And so, for example, we have an annual symposium during which we give opportunities for postdocs to give presentations in different formats that they would traditionally practice, right? So, in your departments, you might be given a seminar that's to a scientific audience within your field, and that's going to be very technical and scientific. When I bring postdocs to our symposium to give presentations, we actually have two formats that we work on. We do a 10-minute talk that's intended for an academic audience, right? So scientifically trained individuals, but not necessarily in your field. And you have 10 minutes to really tell us a story about the work that you do. And then we also have a different format where postdocs are invited to give a 3-minute presentation with a single static slide with the intention of speaking to a general audience. And I think that that's really key because it kind of gives depth to your understanding of your own work, right? So it's one thing to give a scientific seminar of 1 hour to peers who know exactly what you're talking about when you're using acronyms and technical terms. Then it's another to actually kind of distill that down to a 10-minute talk to speaking to an academic audience, and then it's yet another thing to be able to speak about your work in 3 minutes to a general audience, right? And it's not just for the audience, it's not just for the recipient. I think it really helps our trainees to be more cogent and more cohesive and better talk about their own work at all these levels too, right? So engaging with the skill really helps you, and then that can extend as you're looking for jobs, as you're looking for funding, to be able to really think about who am I talking to, what am I trying to convince them of, and so what are the key messages that I need to share with them. So that's why I think that science communication is really important, and it's a skill that really it extends to everywhere, right? As scientists, so yeah.
I think so. So this is a question that I also wanted to like ask, right? Like, I mean, not everyone can, talk about their research. Yes, they can talk to like an academic, kind of a audience, but when it comes to like, talking about research, I mean, as simple as talking about their research on LinkedIn, right? Or, putting a post on LinkedIn and talking about, hey, I've
Mhm.
got this award and I am going to work on this XYZ. And I think it is really important because what I have seen, at least in the US system, is that there are a lot of funders who are not academics,
Mhm.
right?
That's right.
And I feel that, funders, they also deserve to understand, right? That, okay, this is what, this is what is being done, with the funding that we are providing. So just wanted to understand like a couple of things, right? What kind of, and I know, you're talking about the careers, right?
Mhm.
So what kind of careers do you think that apart from just being a faculty, right, that that a postdoc or a PhD can be, right? Also, I think another question would be what kind of careers, right, a postdoc or a PhD can have just with that science communication mindset.
Mhm. So first, I'm going to interject to your original comment, which was some people can't present their research in a good way.
Mhm.
I would say not yet. This is a
Mhm.
practice skill, right? And so the
Yeah,
more you engage with it, the more you are going to be able to do that, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And so part of my role is to provide these opportunities and make sure that you're
Mhm.
not stuck in the lab just doing the work and talking to your peers, and that you actually engage with opportunities outside of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because and to your point, this is a skill that could be applied to specific careers outside of academia, right? So if you want to be a medical writer, if you want to work in outreach, work at science museums, those are areas where you're going to need to kind of exercise this skill, right? And I will say it's interesting because some disciplines are more receptive to that, right? So if you take basic biology departments,
Mhm.
a lot of the time they're primarily NSF funded, which actually usually has like a clause that says you need to engage in outreach, right? And so it instills this need to learn how to do outreach. But beyond the funding, a lot of departments of biology are just involved in outreach because they are talking to high school students, they are engaging with the community a lot more than say in biomedical research, which I don't know why, but that's an observation I've made.
Could
Uh,
be because of like because a lot of it is also related to health and our day-to-day life, and maybe people are more interested in, how diabetes affect them than how an astrophysics particle or like I don't know, right? How is
Well,
that them?
I think that the reason is because there's intellectual property in biomedical research, whereas in
Mm.
basic research like biology, it belongs to everyone because it's just general knowledge, right? And so
Absolutely.
maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak to it, but I've noticed that there is a difference
Mm.
in how people engage with science outreach specifically, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but but to answer your second question about what kind of careers that PhDs and postdocs can go into and exercise science communication skills, there's tons of them, right? And I think that, a big part of my job is really to make sure that trainees, PhDs, and postdocs understand that even though there's the culture of like focusing on developing skills to becoming a good faculty member, in actual fact, that's a really small sliver of the job market for PhDs and postdocs. And I really want, our trainees to engage with this idea that there's lots of careers where you can be fulfilled, happy, and successful, uh, and and still apply the skills that you developed in your training, right?
Mhm.
And in actual fact, I would argue that successful faculty today are those who actually are good at science communication and that do engage with that. And if they weren't before, they've practiced and trained and became effective science communicators. Because if you look at a faculty member today, you've got to convince your department chair to give you a job. You've got to convince funders, and to your point, right? Some funders might be foundations, right? So if you apply for a grant from the Alzheimer's Foundation or the American Diabetes Association or anything like that, a lot of the people who make determinations as to whether you get funding or not, actually they have community based panels who make those decisions. They might not be scientists, right? When you submit a grant to the NIH, yes, it's going to be reviewed by peers. When you submit a paper for review, yes, that's going to be submitted with peers. But yeah, if you submit to a foundation, you need to be able to speak to the patient population that you're targeting, for example, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to start talking about the technical aspects of your research because it, goes over their head. It's like, okay, so how many years until you get a good treatment for me, right? Is what you're gonna is what I'm gonna give you money to do gonna help with getting treatment sooner rather than later? So really, science communication I think applies across the board. Um, but you do see it more in certain careers, right? And so the ones that came off the top of my head is medical writing is a big one, and that's again is a bit of a different type of communication because it's written communication. Um, yeah. If you want to go into science policy, you need to be able to actually speak to a lot of different types of individuals, right? So the way that you talk about science to a politician is going to be way different than with a peer or even with a high school student, right? And so kind of understanding your audience, I think, is the key skill within science communication that we need to exercise.
One thing I'm listening, and one thing I can understand that of course there are different branches. So if someone's doing medical writing, okay, okay, this drug works, so
Hmm.
it will get good headlines even on X or LinkedIn or even on
Sure.
YouTube or even on a magazine newspaper. So these places,
Hmm.
but if it's about I think today we got Nobel Prize announcement for physics, and
Yeah.
it was about quantum mechanics and tunneling, but
Hmm.
if those were topics only physics people can are gonna look at it. Not everyone can understand it. So even in our field, even in simple life sciences, there are so many vast field. Like some people are just looking at how a mice walks, and some people
Right.
are looking at X-ray crystallography of one protein. So to doing science communication in both topics will be very difficult. But what I am understanding that we should at least aspire for it, so that the at least we can say that okay, this is what we are doing, why this is important, in a very layman but scientifically correct terminologies. So
Yeah.
uh,
And,
yeah,
and I think, like, talking about Nobel Prize, to be really honest, like last 2, 3 years, I have seen Nobel, like, I think the kind of stories, like the way they are putting things out, I think it's really wonderful,
yeah,
right? The way they have talked about and I think that can be another career, I guess, in science communication, Nobel Prize Foundation, right? I'm sure there is someone who's writing all these stories and putting it out, and all these illustrations as well, right? I
Mhm.
think that are being made by Nobel Prize, and they're very consistent every year, right? So I guess that could be another career that people can get into if they're interested in, I guess.
Yeah,
But to
yeah,
your point, Abhilash, someone who's doing X-ray crystallography and someone who's doing like basic mouse behavior, um, I still think, yeah, I agree. I think it's important to engage with trying to develop the skill of science communication or communicating your science to a variety of people, right? And not saying that everyone needs to be talking to the lay people, right? And then not everyone needs to be putting stories out there about, you're not going to write a story about X-ray crystallography on LinkedIn and appeal to a broader audience. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I think that there is a way to do it. And one of the things that I've seen be effective, even when you're talking about very kind of niche discipline and areas, is to communicate your enthusiasm for it, right? And I think that that plays a huge role for effective science communicators. Is no matter how complicated and how minute what you are studying is, if you can communicate your enthusiasm and why it matters to humanity and to society as a whole, uh, plays a big part in it, right? Because at the end of the day, if you think about your recipient and your audience, it's all about how it makes you feel, right? And so one of the things I can say is like if you read, for instance, Alan Alda's book on science communication, right? He set up the Alan Alda Center for Science Communication at I believe at Rutgers University. No, I can't remember. You'll have to check and kind of edit this part of the podcast. I can't remember where this center is,
It's
but
okay.
one of the things that they talk about is always like if you want to get people's attention and you want to communicate something that of meaning to them, you have to go through emotions, right? Emotions play a big part in how we receive information and how we share it, right? So that's why showing your enthusiasm for what you do, no matter how minute what you study is going to go a long way in making people care about what you do.
I
that's
think I think it's also important to like be able to tell like a and I think telling like a good story
Mhm.
if as a scientist, like as someone who's trained as a scientist, I think I mean I don't know about biology, but in chemistry it's always about, like how much you're adding and how much you're removing. And what I have always realized is that it's the beginning, middle, and the end. Like even for a story, even for a scientific story, if you have figured those out, if treat your work as character, and if you can bring context to your work, and if you can bring those, okay, this is where it is located or situated, and this is where we are right now, and this is where we want to go in future. I guess that can be a compelling, I mean, as simple as that could be a compelling way to talk about research. And I always believe that, again, like whoever, whatever, maybe there are certain things that you can communicate about, and maybe there's certain things you can't. But I mean, if there is a possibility, I mean, people should, talk about their research left, right, and center. I mean, I want to see Instagram and TikTok reels of researchers talking about their research rather than like whatever is happening over
Well,
there.
Nature hosts a Dance Your PhD competition each year, I believe is what
yes,
it's called. And
yeah,
so
that,
that's a completely different way of looking at it, right? It's
Yeah.
like go and be creative and create a YouTube video of your research.
Yeah.
And it's always fascinating to see the entries in that
I
competition.
mean, I work with high school students, and I've seen that. So there is a competition called the Breakthrough Challenge,
Mhm.
right? And the Breakthrough Challenge, what it does, it actually, motivates high school student to explain a concept in a small video. And the entries are like crazy, and they're so innovative. And the way they communicate, I mean, I always feel that I just hope that these kids go on, do a PhD, and they should be able to communicate their research. But yeah, like yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the last things that we wanted to ask that in current situation,
Mhm.
and this is a very hot topic right now. But over the years, even when I was in India, sorry about the light. Even when I was in India, there was one thing that's very consistent that U.S. Whatever paper I was looking in, American or even big European papers I was looking into, there were so many international students from Brazil, from India, from China, from
Mhm.
France, from Australia, from Thailand. So, so what is the role of US in shaping up the science communication? Because there is something about US that it brings other people to US, not only about the opportunity and money, but the way they do science also.
Mhm.
I think it's very different and it's very positive. Like I really like the way people approach science here, and I have a very positive environment here. So do you think US in future also US will have a bigger role in overall shaping the science communication other than just being okay, we have money, we can do big science, but this can still be a leading force into science communication for future? What do you
Mm.
think?
That's a good question. I will say I think about the scientific enterprise as a global, right? And yes, the US has a critical and central role in it and has for a long time. Um, as you say, probably for for reasons of funding, right? And the fact that there is funding to do, breakthrough research here and the infrastructure to do it too. Um, and it's interesting, like you hear stories about how the global scientific enterprise is kind of shaped, right? So as a French national, it's when you go through your training, it's common for people to get a PhD in France, then go to the US to do a postdoc, get a science paper, right? That's the goal, right? Get a science or nature paper, and then kind of go back to France and become a lecturer or a professor in the education system in France and the research system in France. That is wildly different because it is nationalized, right? So a lot of labs are actually like you're a civil servant when you're a professor or a researcher in a lab in France, right? So it's a little bit different. And so that's just like the prototypical path of a French scientist type of thing. Uh, Again, everyone's like path and career is very unique, and I don't want to make generalizations about all French scientists, but that's one of the ways that you see French postdocs come here, right? For that reason. Um, how that relates to science communication, that's a good question. I don't know that I can answer that question because I don't know if different countries or different areas of, the global research enterprise have better or worse ways of teaching science communication or engaging with science communication. Um, that's a good question. I'd have to look into it to be honest, to answer that thoroughly. But the fact that the U.S. research enterprise is so central and has, it's a powerhouse, um, it's going to have an impact on how we communicate our science, right?
Yeah.
Inevitably. And so, and some of the better science communicators maybe are from here. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, what I see is a very positive environment about science communication, and
Mhm.
everyone is free, like at different level. I have seen high schoolers present to big professors, uh,
Mhm.
in as free and open mind with even just little thing that they did, but they are very sure about it, and they have been trained like from like junior high, high school. They have been trained about the presentation, science communication,
Mm.
and you go participate in different things. Like I don't think I have done anything till my undergrad, and I was
Okay.
in Delhi University, which is one of the biggest universities in India, and it has almost all the facility available for science communication. But that was not part of our curriculum, at least at that time. There might be
Uh-huh.
the communication here because Mrityunjay is also working with high schoolers, those who present and those who give
Mhm.
talk and everything. But some of them also go to US for their future
Gotcha.
studies. So I think that US has a major role to play in this, not only but because the way they develop science mindset. I don't know if Mrityunjay has anything to add to it.
No, I mean I agree with you because again, I again, like we have a lot of friends who've done their PhDs and their masters in India, and then who've moved to US.
Hmm.
And one striking, one common thing between all of them is their opinion that we used to think about science in X, Y, and Z way,
Hmm.
right? But now, since we are here, we think of it as to, hey, now when we are going to communicate our science, we are going to communicate, right? We are
Hmm.
going to actually, write a beautiful story. Talk, obviously, when I say story, it's not like not fiction, but
Right, right.
write a beautiful story, write a beautiful paper that anyone like who's reading, they can understand, right? They can understand um, the motivation behind it, and what Joseph also mentioned, the enthusiasm behind it, right?
Hmm.
That okay, I am, excited to do this work, and I think, and this is what makes science communication. And here in US and even in UK, I spent like 5 years in the UK science system, and I realized that the focus on obviously getting good work, but the focus on telling a good story was equally important. And
Hmm.
I feel that this is how science should be. You do great work, but
Yeah.
you should also tell people that hey, this is what we have done, right? uh
Yeah.
but yeah.
I think yeah I think that your analysis is on point in the fact that the sooner you teach trainees how to feel confident talking about their research, the better that skill is going to be in the long term, right? So it sounds like, based on your experience, for instance, in India, like training in how to talk about your science came later, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, so it sounds like based in the US, I remember when I was a graduate student here at the University of Kentucky, I used to go and be a judge at science fairs. And if you've ever done this, like this is just a wonderful way of learning and being humble, like with high schoolers and middle schoolers who are, presenting. And so maybe that is part of the culture, and it's like it starts early, and the earlier you start, the more engaged you'll have like later on, right? For undergrads and graduate students and so on and so forth, right? So maybe that, yeah. And in England, I mentioned I did a sandwich year here in the US. When I went back, then this was part of the curriculum in England at the University of Bath. We had to give a poster presentation, like every researchers do and at scientific conferences and so on and so forth. And so I think it depends on the curriculum, and it depends on the institutions, and there might be differences across countries. I'd have to ask my French colleagues what it's like in France, whether they start early or not.
Okay.
So
So,
I
so
I didn't train in France, so I don't know.
talking about France, so this was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us, and it's good that we have two educators with us. Jay is also one of them. I'm just a learner here. I don't know anything about science communication. You guys know. One of the things that we do at the end, and we're gonna close it in a minute. Uh,
Sure.
that uh, that we ask our speaker or our guest to say something in their native language, and well, it can be English or anything, but you are from France, so why not? uh,
Sure.
you can have a France, your village dialect or your city dialects, and just just a line about anyone who is in France. I'm sure there are still some people who wants to do science better,
Mhm.
and so if someday some of them can see this video and they can say, okay, in French, how do you want to tell that science is important, science communication is important?
So I guess I mean I have two native languages, right? So I'll do one in English and I'll do one in French. How about that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
in English, I will say one thing that I like to share, to tell trainees is you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? It's a very common saying. But I say this a lot in my work right now. And whether in science communication or applying for jobs or, supporting postdocs in applying for funding or pursuing careers and so on and so forth. And what it means is you've got to try, and that's part of the scientific method, right? Too, it's part of how science is done. You've got to try things to find out what they mean and how they work, and if it's good for you or not, right? So you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So take the shot, I guess, is the real meaning. I did learn recently that this is something that they say in basketball, right? Because you're taking a shot, right? I didn't realize that. I thought it was photography, but anyways.
Thought it was short.
Oh, well, that's that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you should take those, but as a former alcohol researcher, we can talk about that offline. Um, and in French, I will say one thing that inspires me is le mieux est l'ennemi du bien, which
Okay.
means better is the enemy of good, as you for a literal translation. And it speaks to our perfectionism and how it is counterproductive to our work, whether scientific or in science communication or elsewhere, right? So I'll leave you guys with that.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. Those who will be listening to this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. And please follow all of us. We are all on LinkedIn. You can see our names. I'll leave the details. And thank you so much. I hope we'll continue talking about this in future also.